Hello, you all. This is Damian Howard, your host for Village Talks. This is another segment that is power packed and ready to provide inspiration and education around this idea that the village, when we come together, we can bring transformation to the students we care about, the families we care about, and communities at large. And I am so elated that Jeannie Warsaw is here with me today. A fascinating concept in this space of music under the auspices of MEMA. She's going to tell us more about that. For many of us, we know that that's what grandkids might call their grandmas and things of that
Yeah.
nature. And I'm just curious, right, in the moment to hear why she might have named her music company as such. So elated to get into it. Let me tell you all this before Jeannie shares more about her story and her narrative. Y'all, when you start to hear of her lived experience working for organizations like Virgin Records, Sony Records, Warner Brothers, and we didn't even get into all of the names of people that she's met, instances calling out people like Janet Jackson and all of the things, right, y'all? It is about to be off the chain because what Jeannie is excited about and what she has her hands on is taking some of those amazing lived experiences and leveraging that to ensure that kids are getting exposed to the arts. And we know that that's an amazing aspect that can really be a part of their development. So, Jeannie,
Yep.
go ahead, jump in there, help us to get an introduction into who you are and what you have your hands on.
Wow, I don't know if I can top that. That was pretty incredible.
Listen, we're here.
Yeah, okay. And yes, Mima was the loving nickname for my mother, for the grandkids called her that. So that's where that came from. And yes, really how this all started was as a youngster, I really loved music. Music was my solace. Music was what I went to. Music saved me. And I'm dating myself, but I grew up in the very late 70s. And the 60s and 70s were very prominent for me with music, especially the music during the civil rights movement and even folk music. And the idea that music at that time was all cultures blended together, and there wasn't this competitiveness that we see sort of today. And the music really was written for a purpose, not really to make money. These artists were not definitely, doing that. What they were doing was sending messages out to the world saying, hey, this is what's going on in society right now, and we want you to be aware of it so that we can start making changes. We didn't have streaming and we didn't have social media, and music and the lyrics and the messages in these songs were a way to make changes. And there were some changes that were made. There were landmark achievements that happened, during the 60s, during the civil rights movement. So when I left the music industry, the only thing I knew I wanted to do was work with teens, work with youth, and really bring the arts to them. And of course, I wanted to continue using music. And the first thing I thought of was this is a connection. Every kid in the world listens to music, no matter what the genre is. There is a message in every song, regardless of it, whether it's rap, R&B, K-pop. There's something in that brings you to a space where you can just start thinking about yourself, how it relates to you, what's going on. And it's a connection to allow youth to open up. And that's what we've seen in the 15 years that we've had our youth development arts organization,
Mhm.
is when we go into schools with our programs, we hear teachers say, that student hasn't spoken all year. That student sits in class and never says anything. And it's kids with all abilities, just it's wonderful. They connect with the music and they start raising their hand, and sometimes they can't even stop talking because they get so deep into analyzing the message in the song, following some of the prompts that are structured through our activities, relating it to their lives and their experiences, and then creating projects, whether that's multimedia presentations, PSAs, writing their own songs, spoken word, poetry. And then we take them to recording studios in the city and they get to record everything. So that's I know I'm talking quite a lot, but that's like
Yeah.
the gist of what we do. And I will say one other important aspect of all of this is that my experiences working with some of the biggest recording artists in the world is also what brought me to decide how can I reach youth? I think I can reach them through music because when we would have Janet Jackson, premiere at a stadium, you could look out in the audience and see every different type of person that ever existed. Everybody was in that stadium. And there was no fighting and arguing, maybe for a seat, to get to see her close.
Yeah.
But it was just this, and whenever we would have an artist like that performing, I would get chills. And I would always think to myself, how can I make this happen outside of
Yeah.
this concert venue? And how can I get youth to see that there is importance in community
Mm.
and in having conversations? And if using music is the way to do that, then let's do it. And it works.
Let me ask you this. We've been using um, as examples R&B singers and talking
Yes.
even beforehand about just your affinity towards rhythm and blues kind of growing
Yes.
up. What is your
Yep.
favorite R&B song of all time?
Oh my God. Oh, it's terrible. I mean, I'm a big Teddy Pendergrass fan,
Okay,
but I
okay.
wouldn't say that his messages are that social.
That sounds like some love and all type of warm and fuzzy stuff.
But look. Marvin Gaye's 1970 album it
Okay.
changed the world, right?
Wow.
I mean,
Wow.
what's going on with first of all, he was a Motown artist,
Yeah.
and they didn't want him to say anything socio-political.
Yeah.
They didn't want him talking about racism. They wanted him to stick with Motown's formula and put out this music. But he changed everything by putting out What's Going On. And that album was a concept album. That
Hmm.
hadn't really happened during the 70s. And it was a black artist.
Hmm.
And, that was for black artists, each time that they wrote songs that were talking about, social ills and what they were going through and the racial divide and systemic, inequality, that was frightening for black artists to do that
Yeah.
because also their music wasn't even on white radio stations,
Yeah.
right? That was noble and it was scary,
Mm.
but it was something that was so phenomenal. And I think that what we try and do
Yeah.
is we try and teach our youth that we're working with that music has so much to do with what they're listening to today, even if it's drill music or it's music that's, it contains explicit lyrics. The idea is there's a message in these songs that they're
Yeah.
listening to. And if they're connecting to it, the idea is to have a conversation with them about what they're connecting to.
Mm.
Yes, you may hear some explicit stuff, but if you sit down and have a conversation and create activities and projects where they can really get involved and connect it to themselves, it is really an amazing learning tool
Yeah.
because within that, we're also talking about what is mentioned within that song. How does it relate to the streets that these kids are growing up on and in and their neighborhoods? And then they can write and connect it to what they're going through. And all of a sudden, they have found this ability to open up what's been going on inside them that they may not be able to talk to with an adult. They
Mm.
may not even talk to a teacher. But this is a way for them to express themselves without shame, without being nervous, because they connect so well to it.
Yeah, so tell us, in your decade plus experience, leveraging music and the arts to bring out and or might I say to open up pathways in the
Yes.
minds and in the hearts and even in the emotion space for these young people, what would you say is one impact story that comes to mind for you that when you think of this kid, when you think of this
Mhm.
impact that was made, bring us into that space.
So I can give you, so this was in North Lawndale.
Yeah.
Um, I ran the program with seventh and eighth graders combined, which was woo. That was that was an interesting little combination.
Yeah.
Anyway, started out with a lot of music with messages about what's happening in the streets and in their neighborhoods. And I gave each one of them a journal. So every time we analyzed a song, they would just write in their journal anything. However they want to write, they write. We're not concerned with writing verses or sounding like an artist, just writing how it connected to them. And one day, unfortunately, one of the younger boys got kicked out of class, which is a very unfortunate issue that we see in the school system with behavior. And I didn't want him to get kicked out of class, but it wasn't my say. So he went into the hallway and then he knocked on the door and he came in and said, Miss Jeannie, can I have my journal? And I said, absolutely. And I gave him his journal and he sat in the hall the entire hour. The bell rang, class left. He came in, he said, would you read this? And I said, absolutely. And I read it. And quite frankly, it was hard to read. And it was a story about this day that he got kicked out in the hall. It was the anniversary of his brother getting shot in the head on the street. And so, unfortunately, he was kicked out of class for a behavior issue. But if they would have taken the time to maybe just talk to him, hey, what's up? What's going on today? That kind of thing. And then allowed him to stay in the class to journal, he would have been okay because he looked forward to that class every time I came in. And he would show me all the time what he had written. And then, we talked about how he could write his story. Years ago in the 70s, there was a book that was published with two kids who lived in the housing projects, and it was on the radio. And I inspired him, letting him know that that's something that could happen. And it was all through listening to music and having them circle or highlight anything in the songs that resonated with them, something they didn't understand, and then connecting that to what they were going through. And that has sat with me for years.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're at a point in our segment whereas I am asking you to tap into your place and space of imagination, and I'm giving you a magic wand. With that magic wand, how are you going to wield that wand in order to bring about some type of change? And it actually might be an expansion of something that you're already seeing in effect or happening through your work in your area, whatever it may be. How are you going to leverage this wand?
Well, I, I'm going to say the
Wait,
obvious.
I said it the wrong way because your name is Jeannie, so I got to be a little
Yeah.
bit more creative with the way
Oh,
I say this.
no.
So, is it a genie in a bottle
In a
type of
bottle.
situation? We
Yeah.
rubbing it, we rubbing it, we rubbing it. The genie pops out. What change is the genie bringing?
You know, this is a very tough question to answer because obviously, first and foremost, I'm going to say the obvious to get into more or, places where we can run these programs that we see success with, not only with students, not only with youth and community organizations, but with parents who have emailed me. You opened up, my son, you opened up my daughter. I can't believe that they're talking about social justice. They're interested in what's going on in the world, all of the above, right? And I think the thing is that I'm not sure this is going to answer your question, Damian, exactly how you've asked it, but I'm going to say this. I have a lot of adults say to me, how do you play this music? And let me rephrase this. We feature music from the 60s and 70s all the way through to today. And we do feature music that kids are listening to. And with my background in the music industry, it's very helpful because I can also talk to them about marketing and the influence of, listening to something on repeat and how that's, also a marketing ploy and it gets into your psyche and all this kind of stuff. But when adults say to me, but what they're listening to, how can what I would say that, and this is something, again, may not be a straight answer to what you're asking, but I would encourage adults to spend some time with your child, listening to what they listen to. And after you hear that music, just say, wow, what do you like about it? Give me a not a verse, but just a lyric, a line out of there that like really hits you. And I think that if we could get adults and youth, and we do this in a workshop, by the way, to have a conversation around that music isn't, it becomes less scary for some people who feel like, oh, but they're listening to crap. Oh, I can't, this kind of thing. And then also, since we talked about R&B, the adults can go back, the grandmas and aunties can go back and play the Marvin Gayes
Yeah.
and it said right, and then
Eddie
show them the
Pendergrass,
music.
Steven.
But for me, it's really just, I would love to stand up in a stadium, which I could easily do because I've stood up in front of so many people in my life in the music industry. I'd love to get a bunch of teens in a stadium and do a big music event where we're analyzing music, talking, discussing, freestyling. It would be unbelievable.
Well, I'm excited that you and I have met because I am deeply desirous to think about within the ecosystem of folks showing care for young people in the city of Chicago who's already doing work, whereas young people are doing creative expression through music and poetry.
Yes.
And I am aware of some that I've collaborated with in the past. I even think of some of the convenings that we're doing, and they're not major auditoriums per se, but we'll get hundreds, particularly in this space, of black and brown boys in a room. And every time we have them, every transition has music. Even as they're coming in, there's
Oh
music,
yeah.
right? So in some way for them to start being, I would not necessarily say challenged, but inspired to think through, okay, what really is behind, why you're bobbing your head right now and why you're vibing with this, and it helped them to get deeper meaning through conversation about the music that can then translate to deeper meaning in other spaces. So we're going to transition from this. I'm about to thank the audience really quickly, because I know, audience, you all have been inspired, and there is a piece of education that you get. That piece that helps us as youth development workers and or parents to say, listen to some music with your children, ask questions, inquire. Like I feel like such an opportunity that could open up pathways for us to have conversation versus me just wagging my
Huge.
finger. Why in the world are you listening to that spin that S stuff? Do you hear what
Right.
she's saying? She's cursing. What are they talking about with it? You know what I mean? But the like versus kind of coming from a critical standpoint, coming from an exploratory standpoint.
Absolutely.
I think there's a major teaching moment in that for us. So thank you. And Jeannie, just in general, thank you for your presence. Thank you for your work. Thank you for your passion. Thank you for saying, I have unique lived experience, and versus going into traditional retirement, I want to take what it is I know. I want to take my passions and use that in service to my community. I think that that is so powerful and so
Oh, thank you.
inspiring. So I've said
Thank
my
you.
part. I've already kind of said what I need to say to just put some appropriate closure on this podcast. I want to give the mic back to you and allow you to share any last thoughts. And as you share, think about maybe letting us know where we might want to find you if folks want to have further conversation. And if there's any kind of last tidbits that you want to drop into this space, freestyle it, have your way in this moment.
No, I don't sound very good. Well, I was going to say, connected to what you were saying about black and brown young men, is we do have a workshop called The Man I Choose. And it is very interesting because it is based off of the messages in music that are directed at black and brown young men that unfortunately at times are sort of telling them that they have to be, filled with animosity and argumentative and question the masculinity of who they are. And so we also use music in that way too, to talk about what messages are you hearing in these songs, and is it telling you who you're supposed to be and who do you want to be? So I did want to point that out. But other than that, we are MEMA-music.org, MEMA-music.org. We are really focusing now heavily on working with community organizations. We really like that avenue a lot. We've been in schools for the last 15 years, and we're ready. We just want to spread the love, and we've seen the results, and I love it. I love being in front of youth and playing music and discussing and connecting, and let's do it.
Ah, that's so wonderful. Jeannie, thank you for being a guest on Village Talks. You and I,
Thank you.
like I said, we're going to take this off of the podcast space and continue
Oh,
to build and explore more. Go ahead.
wait, one thing. You
Yeah,
said village. It takes a village.
yeah, absolutely.
So you have to listen to the Isley Brothers' Harvest for the World.
All right. I'm looking forward to it.
Make sure you listen to that song.
All right. All right.
All
Thank you,
right.
Jeannie.
All right. Thank